Well, we're recording in progress, you guys.
So the only thing you can't do is block me, because I have to be on this here.
They're not gonna block you, I just.
Why don't you trade seats?
Yeah. I just need to, because I'm gonna be, the idea is I'm recording this for other people too, so I'm gonna be turning over there to talk.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't wanna,
No, I don't,
you're good.
I don't want to get in your.
You're good, just so that I'm not blocked, but you can pull up.
And take one of those, please.
Yeah.
And get one down at the guy at the end there. Look at that.
Hey, Daryl.
No, you need one of these.
I didn't think it'd be good for me to be all the way down there, although maybe that is the best.
No, they
Is
can
this
see
yours,
you
Greg?
really well.
No wonder it's dark.
All right. We're getting started on a Bible study series here on the book of Hebrews. This is the Tuesday. It's supposed to be a lunch Bible study, but I'm the only one who ever eats here. And I'm not eating today. But we're going to be recording these now, and that doesn't mean we have to behave or anything. It's just that if we can not talk over each other, that will be helpful. And, just make sure that we
Raise our hand.
understand there's some people that might watch this at another time at home. So I'll be turning to the screen more than I usually would. And so greetings to you who are watching, and hey, Doug.
No, we're early.
She can make room for you.
There's a chair there and a chair there.
Yeah. We're recording, so we want to see you.
That's right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's better than too hard. So, how many people you went through the book of Hebrews study already with Pastor Rich a number of years ago?
Yeah.
Okay, so I certainly am not an expert in it, so I'd be happy for whatever you learned or have learned since. That's the best thing about this Bible study is we're all learning together. Picking this book was an interest to mine because I am been looking at the Jewishness of Jesus, and the idea, of course, is obvious that Jesus was Jewish. But we don't think about it. We think about Jesus and Christianity synonymously. And so we sometimes need to really be reminded that he was a Jewish background, and that the very first people that would have believed that he was worth paying attention to were Jewish people. And Hebrews is written to that generation of people, or maybe the second generation of people who were believing in Jesus as the Messiah, as maybe a son of God, stretching further than just Messiah because of the amazing circumstance of his resurrection and his miracles, and beginning to look back in the Old Testament and seeing things about Son of David, Son of God, the Savior being sent, all these kind of things were working their way around these Jewish people who were hearing about Jesus Christ from those who witnessed him. This is written at a time where some of those people are starting to lose some of their zeal or actually beginning to reconsider. And you can imagine when you've made a big change in your life, that you might start to reconsider at a certain moment in time. Maybe you get married and then 3 or 4 months into, you're like, what did I get myself into? Or you move and you say 6 months into it, what did I get myself into? And there can be circumstances like that. In the case of Jews, they had to leave an awful lot behind to end up being Christian. So they would oftentimes lose their family. If you can afford to do that, does anybody feel like they could afford to lose their family because of a new idea, a new faith, that would be almost ridiculous in our culture today. We'll just have a different faith, or it's no big deal, or whatever the case may be. And no, then if you believe something different, it could cause your family to risk being kicked out of the synagogue. the synagogue was a place of, a place where Jews and Christians were. And they were, as they intermingled, they shared about Jesus. Is he the Messiah? He is the Messiah. Why would he be the Messiah? Well, eventually, Jewish people that were not convinced didn't want to hear that anymore. And so they kindly started to invite the Jewish Christians to find another place to worship. Romans were getting a little concerned here and there because Romans had authorized Jews to only worship one God. They'd known the Jews a long time. They felt like they could, that was the best thing for them to do politically speaking, but this new Christian group coming along with one God, three gods, what they, but refusing to bow down to Caesar as God. Not willing to do that. So there was some difficulties for people who were professing themselves as Christians. And it might have been very, tempting to go back to the Judaism that at least Rome was authorizing. Business deals, you could lose customers, you could lose contracts, you could your daughter might have a hard time getting a man because you become Christian. And not to mention standing out now amongst your older friends with not eating the same foods as them anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And if you have a gluten intolerance, going to a house you've been invited to eat, how awkward it feels.
Yeah.
Right. I'm gluten intolerant. Do I tell them? Is that their problem? Is that my problem? What do I do? Do I ask them about every food? How do I, right? Imagine being Jewish and then becoming Christian. Now you're eating all these foods and the Jewish people are like, what are you doing? This is crazy. So there could have been many reasons to return to the fold of Judaism. And this book is written to say, please don't. What you believed at the time, and what got you this far is valid, and it is the truth. And hang in there. We need to hang in there. We'll give you some reasons to hang in there. And this is really like essentially a pep talk for that. It's one of the most beautifully written books in the New Testament. And it's very powerful in the way it's written. So it's a good preacher, a really good preacher who spends some time putting in there, even though it's called a letter, it more appropriately should be called the sermon.
But nobody knows who wrote it.
We don't. Well, we're getting there. Yep. The sermon to the Hebrews. So I found a nice resource, and you can find it online as well if you want. And it is Matthew Z. Capps. It's at the very top of the under introduction, a 12-week study. And you can, I can give you the directions to find that online, and you can have the whole study, but I didn't want to steal his whole study. We did make a donation, but I didn't feel like, so I made excerpts in the handout, and those of you online can get the handout from church. You'll see that I've left spaces in between, either for notes in your reading before you come, or your notes while you're here that you want to write down, and left some space for that. It's 12 weeks long, and today is the going to be the introduction. So we're going to spend more time on the background, but I think it's worth it. That's a good way to start. So let's begin with the what's in your handout. If someone could read the first paragraph to us.
The anonymous book of Hebrews is a unique contribution to the canon of Scripture. Like many other New Testament letters, Hebrews begins with an introduction, though it closes with blessings and greetings. The author sheds light on the form of Hebrews by referring to his writing as a word of exhortation. Hebrews is written in a pastoral voice, with many practical exhortations, leading many to consider it a single sermon or sermonic discourse, addressed to converts from Judaism under pressure to revert to Jewish faith. Hebrews is also considered one of the most beautifully written and stylistically polished books of the New Testament, a literary masterpiece. The author is a master of rhetorical debate and persuasion. He also demonstrates his profound theological prowess with his use of imagery, metaphor, allusion, Old Testament analogy, and topography. Throughout his exposition and exhortation, the author weaves a beautiful tapestry of biblical theology with the aim of exalting the supremacy of Jesus Christ.
Okay. So I kind of covered some of the bases I mentioned earlier. The supremacy of Jesus Christ is the theme of this book. This is your main reason to stay with Jesus Christ and to remain a Christian, is because you would be settling for something less valuable, inferior to this. Now, this brings up the concern we always have as we're reflecting on the relationship between Jewish and Christian groups. Is this an anti-Semitic work? Does this by its nature become anti-Semitic? There are clearly quotes that one can take from the Gospels that can be interpreted in their isolation as anti-Semitic, in the sense that the clarity that it is the fault of the Jews, for example, that Jesus is crucified, or the Jews are resisting. It's the Jews that did this. It's the Jews that did that. Some of the Gospels are more, excessive in that than others. John's Gospel being notable, and this is a problem for our relationship to Jews today. Is that some of that language comes out, and it is still can fan flames of whatever kind of as I talked on Sunday, tribalism. Really, it's all about tribalism. We're in the Christian tribe and they're in the Jewish tribe. The Christian tribe's got to be better than the Jewish tribe, right? And when there's problems, we can blame the Jewish tribe because it certainly isn't our fault. And we could you could replace that with the Chinese people saying this to the Taiwanese people. You can replace really anybody with anybody. Any tribe you want, pick one tribe up against another, and you can find
That's like
those Italians.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? Those Italians, you can start in, it just depends on what tribe you most closely identify with. Some of us don't feel like we identify as much with a tribe anymore. There's the melting pot theory of the United States. However, we just have other tribes. So now you have a tribe of AARP membership, right? Or you have a tribe of the people who are from the Midwest that are certainly far more grounded and realistic than the people of South Florida. Or you will always choose tribes. We choose tribes. Even Advent's better than St. Paul, which is of course true. But you make your choice. The question is how antagonistic and what kind of conclusions do we draw? And anti-Semitism is saying that there is to be a tribe of Christians, it requires us to be anti-Jewish people. That there's a thought process that would occur that just like Lutherans and Catholics wouldn't get married back in the day, right? So what do we do about that? Well, we can roll with that. We can roll with that and say, well, that's just how the author of Hebrews decided to write. It's better. He doesn't really worry about hurting Jewish people's feelings. He's in a hurry. He's desperate. He's trying to push his point home. He's not maybe wholesale condemning Jewish people by all this, but nevertheless, the tone can be there. Another way to look at that, this might be to say that it's supremacy, not in the sense of my dad's stronger than your dad, na, but to rather say we have been blessed with additional information. The Christians feel blessed to have additional information about the God Jehovah, and that is that his son is Jesus. Okay. Are we superior in our being because of that, or have we simply been gifted with that? And that's a gift that we've been given. And it's far different to say we understand that those who are Jewish and remain so today haven't received that gift, but not to claim it as the tribalism. And I think, it's important to try to do that and say, I would use the example, the Mormons think they've received an additional gift, right? And the Christian Scientists, they feel like they've received additional
Jehovah Witness too.
Jehovah's Witness, additional revelation. And so what we would say is we're nothing without our Jewish heritage. That Jewish heritage is all that came to get to Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So we need it all. We adore it all. We revere it all. And our break spot is where we go with what we've been given, and Jewish people went where they were given and continued to be communities of faith, and superiority not requiring us to get into a tribalistic, atmosphere to each other, but rather one of respect, right? So I think we can read this book that way as well. It doesn't have to be seen as just putting down the Jews.
Pastor, wouldn't it be more anti-Semitic from a Jewish standpoint than from an outside world? Because with Hebrews, it's a lot of times trying to convert or helping to keep the Jews into Christianity, or converting Jews to Christianity. And by doing that, you would think that a Jew, like the Jewish hierarchy would probably consider this to be a bad book because it's trying to pull people away from Judaism into Christianity. So in that way, they could consider it to be anti-Semitic versus, beating them up, because the book doesn't really beat up Judaism. It just, like you said, it just says you're just missing a few things. We're trying to point out to you.
Right. And in order to show that Jesus's supremacy, interpretation of Old Testament will occur. That interpretation is going to be rejected by Jewish people and accepted by Christian people. So we read the Old Testament differently than they do. Did you know that?
No.
Why? Because we read it looking for Christ.
Yes.
They're not looking for Christ in the Old Testament.
Different lens.
And in fact, I've said before, we are supposed to now read it looking for Christ.
Yep.
That he is the litmus test, the lens, everything that should allow us to look at the Old Testament. I'm going to probably do a Bible study for starting in January, and I think I'm going to be doing it at nighttime. I think I'm going to be doing it only Zoom, and it's going to be a year through the Bible that through the lens of Jesus.
Wow.
Only seeing the Bible through the lens of Jesus, and being able then to work out some of the difficulties with, Doug and I have talked many times, we're working out the difficulties of Joshua. And how do you ever come to thinking about Joshua through the lens of Jesus? And so, because there's some things that happen in Joshua that just don't seem compatible with what we know about Jesus. So, yeah.
I read the first 2 chapters of Hebrews.
Okay.
And I got the impression that they were trying to not indoctrinate, but teach them that Jesus was prophesied in the Old Testament.
Exactly.
And that he is the fulfillment of those prophecies.
That is
I
right.
didn't get the feeling that they were putting down the Jews. I didn't get that.
Well, I'm from a generation that's extremely insensitive about diversity and how people understand how we're talking and dialoguing with each other. So I probably bring this up more than you would. So please understand that. If you don't read it,
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, if you don't read it and you're married to a Jewish person and you don't read it, then it may not be there. But I do know from some of the other things that I've read to get ready for this, that this is a central issue that does come out in modern scholarship was how do we have dialogue with Jews and continue to, have a respectful dialogue with Jews with some of the anti-Semitic or over and against Judaism conversations. And Hebrews is one of those books, but not the worst. I would say probably John might be the one that's the hardest on Jews, making it pretty darn clear that
You mean the letters of John?
Gospel of John.
That's good, John. Oh, yeah.
Now I believe
Little things like this that you don't notice, but the use of Mel Gibson heavily of John, and Mel Gibson comes from a particular Catholic tradition that has a certain they've held on to an antipathy toward Judaism. And so the Mel Gibson Passion of the Christ, some viewed as highly anti-Semitic in the way it was portrayed. I'm not saying whether I can say for sure or not. It's in the eye of the beholder. If you're Jewish and you feel like it's being improperly directed toward you, we should respect that. We should be aware of that. But the book is the book. The book wasn't trying to create really antipathy with Jews. It was rather trying to reinvigorate Jewish Christians. Eventually that would not end up being the future of Christianity. Jewish Christians would not be the future of Christianity. They would end up being, kind of displaced relatively early on and within a few generations by Gentiles. So that may also be why most of us are not that familiar with Hebrews. If you think about it, what it's talking about there is not really what we might be concerned with. And you'll see as you go along, you said, oh, that was important, huh? That's important? Oh, okay. I'll give you more idea of the milieu that was occurring. Now, what Jewish Christians had to struggle with to stay in the Christian movement, to remain in it.
I've read it probably 5 times in the last 2 weeks.
Nice.
And then I finally came up with the idea that as I read it, I'm saying to myself, does this apply to me? Because, it looks like it's for the Jewish people, but yet it's for everyone, as far as I'm concerned. And there's some really controversial things in here. I just read it and it's really, really interesting.
It may be advanced studies, Mark is Jesus 101. And maybe Hebrews is, a 400 level class. And in fact, if you ever work with new believers, I talked to our missionary in Bangladesh and I said, please start with Mark or Matthew. Don't worry about the Old Testament believers. Don't worry about, they don't. The last thing we want to do is to approach a bunch of Muslims who are trying to convict about Christ and spend our whole time on Old Testament. That's not going to get them anywhere. Yeah, we don't want to start them off. You don't need to start there. Yeah, let's start with the good stuff, and Hebrews, though, I think we're people who are more than familiar with the good stuff and 101. And this is a 400 level here. All right, next paragraph, the central motif.
Whoever does it, do it loud so they can hear you.
Central motif of Hebrews is Jesus Christ is better. The words better, more, and greater appear combined 25 times. In many ways, the glory of God, as revealed in Jesus Christ, is the gravitational center of Hebrews. Hebrews 1-12 outlines a powerful theological argument for the superiority of Christ above all created things and all Old Testament counterparts, with a special focus on encouraging the reader to persevere in the faith that has Christ as its center. Through encouraging words, firm warnings, and contrasting examples, the author often calls the reader to respond to Christ in worship.
So the better, more, greater, again, is this supremacy, and why go back? Why would you go back? if you have the iPhone 13, why would you go out and buy a 9? Right?
You wouldn't.
Don't really, I hope you don't. I mean, that would be a bad idea. You know, so why would you want to go back? Well, what could happen is that you could be encouraged to find out that, you know, not encouraged, you could be concerned that staying with the better is just harder, right? It's just harder. Maybe it is better, but it's harder. You could say in the store, the better one is going to be costlier.
Yeah.
Right? So you say, wow, do I pay the price for the better, or do I go with the good? You know, and that's a little less money, and I can, you know, say, you know, the problem with the good is it's not
The best.
It's not, it's, you know, it's, anybody ever painted with roller?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
So the, good, better, and best
all the paint.
applies there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, you know, and then when you go to paint, quality, you know, so my wife is, only, what's the name of it now?
Here.
The one that's over on
Yeah.
Benjamin Moore.
Benjamin Moore.
Benjamin Moore.
Only Benjamin Moore. It's more, all right.
Yes.
It's like 30% more than any other paint. And then usually you have to go, I go to the store to buy it. So it's not even 30% more. Why, that's the only paint that SRD Building Corporation will use is more.
Jim's work.
Unless something more expensive has been developed, maybe Doug would know, there's even more. But, you know, in a do-it-yourself or on TV, they might say to you, you can buy cheaper paint. How many times do you want to coat this thing?
Yeah.
You know, and I think this is the argument, the better. I mean, do you really want to go back? Is that really going to work to go back? You know, what does that mean for you to go back? It means far less than you have right now. Maybe you've just forgotten that, you know. So the argument that God is revealed in Jesus Christ in not a way that is, I am going to be speaking through Aaron. I'm going to be speaking through Isaiah, but rather I am the speaker. The authority, his words are my words are his words. Would you want secondhand information, or do you want it right from the
Horse's mouth.
horse's mouth? And, you know, you got the prophets, that's right. But, and in fact, we'll see the very first line says, God used the prophets, but now, this is the gospel. This is the truth. Do you really want to go back from that, even if it is a little less expensive to your life? It's a question that has to be answered. Not a question any of us really have to answer, to Dick's point. No one's really hounding us. However, I would say if you want to be authentic and engaged as a Christian, it's better and it's costlier. You're losing an hour to 2 hours right now. Maybe you don't think of it that way, but maybe other people would that aren't here.
Yeah.
It's a couple hours to go to that Bible study. How can I fit that into my retirement schedule?
And then we
Right.
go to 2 or 3 of them a week.
Or a Sunday thing, or when it comes to volunteering, to do
Yeah.
volunteering, if it comes time that you're praying for other people and the time you're giving to or the money that you give to church, to other projects, it's costly to be more engaged. It is, right? The more you get engaged, the more time, energy, and money
Jim
will
always
be
said,
expended.
Jim always said, you know, the majority of the miles on our car is from church. I go, yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Just go back and forth.
Yes, but God gave it to you.
Yeah.
So you got to give it back.
right. Well, yeah. And what is hard to convince people is it's worth the price.
Yes.
And sometimes we've got members who know it's worth the price, But lately, they don't feel quite like paying the price. So they've backed up in activity, or they come less often, or they've got other priorities. Pandemic was really hard for us in that regard. A lot of people decided they now had a real good excuse to not be as involved. And what's interesting is whether they will get involved. So, Pastor Dave's spending a year on what?
Activate
Why is he doing that?
to get people involved.
There are people that have not activated. You're here, but there's plenty of people that haven't activated in several years. And so
Yep.
he could have called it reactivate.
I think, I heard a preacher say one time, he said, I doubt seriously if God uses anybody mightily that he does not hurt deeply.
Okay.
And I thought to myself, where'd you get that? And then in there, as we go, where he makes the statement here about unless God chastises you, you are not a child. And so I kept looking up chastise, and it goes to scourge, it goes to flogging, it goes to almost death. And so it is very interesting, some of these statements that he makes.
Yeah, when we get to that one, we'll have to dig in on that, but certainly we have to remember again that there's a shift in thinking about why things happen that I can't say it's complete and total, but it's significant. The Old Testament, everything good or bad comes from God. Everything good or bad comes from God. If you don't understand that when you're reading the Old Testament, you're going to be very confused. What happens in the New Testament?
Love. Grace. Grace, love.
What really bad thing happened that changed everything?
Jesus died.
Oh,
Death,
that.
right?
Yeah.
So everything changes from that death. God is no longer against us in any way. He is for us
Mhm.
because of Christ. So there is a shift. God no longer uses his arm of punishment, at least not as he would have in the Old Testament. Rather, instead, he is for us and he is with us, and Jesus has paid that price. God allows sin, evil, freedom. So we do get hurt. We do have consequences. But we don't believe in the same level of the Old Testament that God is inflicting consequences upon us
Yeah.
in quite the same way that they did. So that may help when we get to that part, Dick, about the chastising, because I think that is less punishment than what we call discipline. Discipline to help someone get on the right track, which, no one really thinks spankings really did, do you? Did they really get on the right track? Well, maybe, I don't know, we could argue, but
No.
certainly not as well as, other means of guiding a child. So good. So we're going to get some firm warnings that are going to, if you go back, beware. If you go back, you lose something by going back. You lose something by going back to not having Jesus as your savior. You're going to lose something. Interestingly, the argument is not primarily made around you're going to lose salvation, like heaven. And that would be a good argument, right? That would be the most common argument we would use today, I think, is to say to someone in love, aren't you at all concerned about your eternity by saying that you no longer believe in God? Aren't you concerned about that? Their answer will be no, because
There is no heaven. That's what I get.
I don't think about it. There is no heaven, essentially, or I think we're all going to end up in the same place, which is just convenient, statements. I don't think it's very well thought out anymore for people. I don't think that they're that worried about it. We've kind of gotten to the point where maybe life is so good now that one life is enough for people. Is that maybe it? That is not used as an argument. Nor will they use the argument that if you go back, you'll be afflicted with boils, or other things, that those arguments aren't used. But there are others that are used that are fascinating.
They
Okay.
do mention the devil in the first chapter.
Yeah.
They do mention.
All right. Next paragraph.
Hebrews contains 35 direct quotations from the Old Testament, along with many allusions and references. With the Old Testament background in mind, the author argues that God's glory and redemptive plan are finally and most clearly revealed in Jesus Christ. The superiority of Jesus is demonstrated in that he is greater than any angel, priest, or old covenant institution. Christ is the complete atoning sacrifice and final priest. In him we see the fulfillment of all the Old Testament hopes and promises, ushering in the long-awaited new covenant age.
Okay, who's going to talk about it?
Our leader walked out.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope he's okay. Here he comes.
When it's first filming.
Your first
missed
filming,
you.
your first filming and you walked out.
I know. Look at this. All right.
I like the last.
So the direct quotations, that's common in what other book, what a gospel especially is noted for that, quoting a lot from the Old Testament.
It's probably Mark.
Matthew. Matthew's the,
Mark or
Yeah.
John.
Matthew is very, very interested in tying to the Jews, and he's going to tie into the Jewish world and the history, and he's going to, he uses that quite a bit. And Hebrews, it makes sense. The book doesn't come with a name, we always like to think of these things as coming down to us in this form, but it was a long time ago. But there was no title for this. But the evidence of reading it and all these Old Testament quotations convinced the people who did give it a name that this must have been a letter to Hebrews. And this must have been aimed toward them. And these quotations tipped them off. They're like, you're not writing this to Gentiles. They don't know the quotations, right?
Right, right.
One of the things we find out in preaching, it gets difficult. It's getting more and more difficult in preaching is that I can't count on literacy in the congregation. I can't count on a biblical literacy. I can't account for theological literacy in the congregation. And that's changed. At one point in time, I could say something like, Samson, and immediately people would know the story of Samson. I could mention, something about the writing on the wall in Daniel, and people would know that. Well, you can't do any of that now. So on Sunday, I got myself into that trouble. I've got 3 stories I want to cover. And by the time I've tried to explain myself out of 3 stories, I realized it's a 30-minute sermon. And I mean, 25 is better, really, honestly. Maybe you would think even less. But, when I get to 30, I'm like, darn it, I didn't want to get to 30. But that's the problem now, is everything has to be explained more. Then I find out cultural literacy. So if I'm going to use an example of a movie or a baseball team or a person, I can't count on you all knowing that person.
Especially with the different age
Oh.
groups. Yep.
Yeah, so when I talked about Danny Bonaducci a couple of weeks ago, that left half the congregation out. Yeah, right. And I think this week someone came out on the way, they came out, I love John Denver. I always think it's funny, you have a whole sermon, but what they remember is like the little thing you threw out there. But the problem with that impact is when I showed I like to use the slides because I like to have the impact. So I mentioned John Denver. A light bulb goes off over half the congregation. The other half doesn't know really what I'm talking about at all. Any more than I remember when I was preaching my first sermon and it was based on Top Gun. That was the first time, Top Gun. That's how long ago my first sermon was.
30-something years.
Yeah, yeah. It was a big, long example in my first sermon.
That can be used.
My congregation was like,
You could be using that.
yeah, I know, exactly. Yeah.
Get out.
But can you imagine that congregation going, what is he talking about? They're not going out to the movies. They're not going to those movies.
Yeah.
They're not, I mean, Top Gun, Tom who, you know, but anyway, so when they look at these scripture quotations, it has to be sent to people who can understand those. So those quotations matter. And how he uses them is a whole fascinating thing, as we talked earlier, from the perspective of Christ, from how this leads us to Christ, how the Old Testament was leading us to Christ. The idea becomes so significant in the early Christian community that the Old Testament was leading us to Christ all along. That it's not discontinuity, it's continuity between the two. But Jewish scholars to this day might say that is not what that means at all, for example. But Christians read it that way. Christians read it differently. And as a result, that's where we get into friction, right? We read the Old Testament differently than the people who owned it, right? Who own it. But we have to, we have to. So whatever that means in terms of scholarships, when I read Old Testament scholarship and it's saying this is what it meant to the people then, I have to weigh it off against what the New Testament people using it meant by it. So you'll get in if you read enough and interact enough with these things, you get that different way of reading it also separates us even from our past, because they're kind of, what book are you reading? The same book you are, but I've got different glasses on now with the lens of Jesus in them. And so it's fascinating.
Working,
And that's
the
where you-
lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
And that's where the context comes into play too. That back in that day, I mean, Hebrews back in the day that was written would have very little, if any, meaning to Gentiles.
Right.
Because when he quotes the Old Testament, the Jews of that time would be studying it more than us or anybody else does today. And the Gentiles wouldn't even have picked it up or even understand it.
No. Can you imagine having to become a Hebrews Old Testament scholar before you could become a Christian?
Yeah, that,
I mean, we don't ask that of anybody,
no.
but at that time, the audience,
The Jews,
that was going to have to be your convincing point. You would have to convince them they're related to what they believed before. They're not going to say, I utterly believed everything wrong before.
Right.
They would not, so Christianity says, no, you didn't. And Jesus certainly, not one, line was changed from the old to the new in me, but I've come to fulfill it. I've come to fulfill it.
Interpretation
Mhm.
of what you were reading and what it means.
Yeah. Did I'll start the quotes, the key verses when I was out?
No, we just stopped at that. Hebrews
We're right above
35 paragraph.
2, 3,
Right
we're the
above
fourth
David
paragraph.
Star.
Historical background.
Okay, all right, let's do the date and historical.
Who's gonna read it? Lisa.
Lisa, fourth paragraph, please.
Hebrews was written in the first century, probably before AD 70. The author of Hebrews does not name himself. There has been much conjecture as to his identity, as the early Christian theologian Origen said, only God knows who who he is, but we can be sure that the author was familiar with his audience, for he longed to be reunited with them and is able to give them the news of Timothy, Paul's second in command.
Go ahead.
The traditional title to the Hebrews reflects the ancient notion that the original audience was primarily made of Jewish Christians. One can safely assume that the audience was familiar with and well understood the many quotations and allusions to the Old Testament. Certainly, the author was addressing professing Christians with his letter. Several times, the author urges them to maintain their confession and faith.
Great. Okay. Bible Project, our
Homework?
wonderful resource, if you want. You might like it though. It's Bible Project is bibleproject.com or whatever. It's got short graphic introductions to all the scripture now, I think. And the Hebrews one is excellent. And I'm passing out what they call their poster. If you watch the video, they have a clever way of drawing all the drawings as they're talking.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really fun.
I've seen them many times. Yeah.
Yeah, so do take YouTube Bible Project Hebrews. That's all you'll have to do. You'll find it. And take a second to watch that on your own, I think.
What's it called again?
YouTube.
Bible Project.
Bible
And then-
Project. Okay.
Go to YouTube if you just type that in, or in the letter to the Hebrews or Hebrews. Again, look, we say the letter to the Hebrews, Jesus is the ultimate revelation of God. So that's a common theme from this other commentator. And if we look over at the left, we see the author question mark. Why don't we really know the author? It was always understood to be Paul. That's probably one of the reasons why it made it into the book. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And it doesn't really sound like him. And the scholars started looking at it pretty early on, though they decided to keep it as noteworthy scripture. They got less and less tied to Paul for it. But it's interesting that he knows Timothy. He's swimming in the same waters as Paul is, but he seems to be maybe while Paul is moving on to Gentiles, maybe this guy is said, well, if Paul's going to move on to Gentiles, I'm not giving up on the Jews yet. Yeah, maybe that's what it was.
It wouldn't be his brother, would it? I don't know
Oh,
exactly.
something like that. That'd be fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And then it could be a sister. I don't want to leave that out. You know, it's funny that they said
There's a lot of women.
him.
Yeah.
And I said, wouldn't it be fun if this was actually anonymous because it was a woman and she knew it wouldn't get published?
It'd actually be flat.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
In the new.
And on the far right, we see that box that it's called a brief, like Pastor Andy, a brief word of exhortation, 1322. The audience, going back over to the left side, thorough knowledge of Old Testament scripture. So we're going to go across the top. How do we know this thorough knowledge of Old Testament? You talk about Abraham.
Mhm.
Okay, they're going to talk about the nation of Israel as if it's a thing that they should know about. Moses on Mount Sinai,
The Torah.
Torah and covenant. Priests and sacrifices are mentioned, and the time in the wilderness to the promised land. So essentially, that is the Old Testament.
Yeah.
That's pretty,
We would all know that.
and so referring to those things, in fact, making those hallmarks in his arguments for the supremacy of Christ. And so these would not be of any interest to a Gentile. You cannot prove to me that Jesus is the Son of God by a story relating it to Abraham. I just don't care. I don't know Abraham. So unless you got time to teach me who Abraham is, let's talk about what Jesus is. And so look at what Paul uses, you know, how Paul talks about how he uses so many Gentile principles. Whatever is good, whatever is noble, whatever is true. Jesus becomes the epitome of philosophy, which the Greeks and Romans, philosophy.
Yes.
We don't have Paul appealing to one of their other gods' scriptures. There's other scriptures at this time. Paul doesn't use other scriptures. Maybe he doesn't even know them, but he does know philosophy. He does know the words and the thoughts John's gospel knows a stream of philosophy that is called Gnosticism. And John knows that if I talk about Jesus in a Gnostic way, I have the chance of drawing them in, making those connections. I talked with the kids in 8th grade or 7th grade a couple of weeks ago. I was going to do Jesus's birth, but I called it his origin story. Does anybody know why I call it his origin story? Yeah, this is really big in the Marvel universe.
Oh.
Everybody has origin stories.
Yeah.
And sometimes you meet them at a point, you don't know the origin story, but inevitably there'll be a movie or something that gives you their origin story. So I said, when I used the word origin story, they knew exactly what I was talking about. And I said, what's Batman's origin story? And you'd be amazed at all the names and the dates and the places. What's Superman's, and then I said, all this is going on with the kids. And I'm like, now what's Jesus's origin story? They don't know Jesus's as well as they know Batman's. I can tell you that. Some of them. So that was interesting. I should have asked Harry Potter's. I mean, they could have gone on for days. They know more about Harry Potter. More kids are familiar with Harry Potter than the Bible. That's for sure. I'm almost positive of that. The Bible's so much better.
Yeah.
Okay. So two main goals in the book are on the far left again. And it's so much easier when you watch the video because they draw it in order.
It's
So
really cute.
I'm jumping around a little bit. But one is to show Jesus is superior to everything. So why accept second best? Second challenge is for the reader, therefore, to remain faithful. Don't go back. Don't go back to what you're experiencing. He uses a very, as it says, a very clear and very well-structured argument. So what we would call it, kind of like a 3-point sermon, where you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell your first point, your second point, your third point, and then at the end you tell them what you told them. Right? That's a classic sermon. And I'd still probably use that style as much as anything because, that's the best way to proceed. So the first is to say that Jesus is superior to angels and the Torah. This is a big deal.
Yeah.
You're making pretty strong claims here.
Yeah.
Jesus is not beneath the angels. Jesus is not
He's above.
before, after the Torah or just adding a note to it. He's actually God's Torah. Jesus is God's Torah. Now, this is,
Covenant.
the new covenant. And so, warning is, if you go back, you're going to settle for an inferior word. You're going to settle for an inferior word. You're going to get, something that's not as good. Then we move to Moses in the promised land. Israel, Israel getting to the promised land. The warning is that the Old Testament can no longer get us to the promised land. It doesn't get us there. It stops short. And so only Christ can take us the rest of the way. Priest and Melchizedek. This is one of the more, amazing things in the book of Hebrews is how a otherwise obscure priest king of the Old Testament who's barely mentioned becomes a focal point of this writer's argument as to why Jesus is the high priest and how he combines in his high priesthood both the priestly function and the kingly function, bringing those together. And so that he is the priest, and only he can be the one who can be both priest and sacrifice. You think about that. He is the lamb and he is the one who performs the offering. He's both. And finally, then the cross as being that ultimate sign of sacrifice, and that he is the perfect one. And then there'll be some examples of great people, the cloud of witnesses that we should look to, and how they did not abandon their faith, and therefore you should be the same
I noticed
as,
that too.
as they were. Although you're going to maintain faith, not in the Old Testament,
And
but
two
in,
women made the list.
yes, it's the Hall of Fame, exactly,
And two
yeah.
women made the list.
There you go, good, yeah, as should
Esther
be.
should be in there.
So it is a letter of encouragement that you did make the right choice and don't go back. Don't go back. You can see that I've also put the outline in outline form there. And you can also use it that way.
Me too.
So as we wrap up here,
We got a kick.
what, before we met, what was your impressions about Hebrews? And it's okay if you didn't have any at all, but or did anybody have any preconceived ideas or?
Well, I
Thoughts?
knew that they didn't know who authored it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really all I really knew.
Mhm. Have you,
Yeah.
had you heard of it much?
Not much, no. No, they don't
Ann?
refer to it.
You mentioned once in church
Mhm.
that if you want to get a good foundation of what the Bible's all about, read Hebrews.
Mhm.
I remember that.
Yeah, yeah.
Ooh.
It's certainly concise. Pulling it all together for people who know the past and who know some people who know the Old and New Testament. It pulls it together in the way that we've continued to see it.
I
Yeah.
think it's got some real warnings, because when it talks about apostasy and going back, you know, it says if you've ever tasted the Holy Spirit and you have these good things and you go back, and then it gives you what's going to happen to you, and you're going to go to hell, is what it says in Hebrews. So, you know, that's
It was scary.
interesting. When we get there, there's some interesting things that
I like the very first ones. Hebrew 1:1.
that says.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought once saved, always saved. You know,
Chris?
But this is saying, no, you can't go back.
We had an
But is
argument
that
over
just
chastise the other night.
Yeah.
for the Jewish people? You can't go back to those sacrifices. You've already tasted it. And so, anyway.
That
Wait.
verse I was looking,
Okay,
Pastor
we'll wait till we get there.
Pastor Dave preached 2 Sundays ago, and I couldn't remember the verse from Hebrews. It's
Okay.
10, chapter 10:22. It's beautiful. It's talking about cleansing you of your guilt. So that to me is, I think, a very important verse.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I've always loved 10:24. Let us not forsake the gathering together with
Mhm.
one another. Let's spur one another on to love and good deeds.
Good
Yeah.
deeds,
And not forsake the gathering together, as is the habit of some.
Yeah.
You know,
Very timely for us now.
It really is.
Yes.
But if I can remember being back in youth group, like probably senior high, senior. And that verse was pointed out to us by our youth pastor. That's always stuck with me.
Mhm.
We're to spur each other on in our loving good deeds. We're to encourage each other.
Mhm.
And we can't do it alone. We can't go it alone. We
Mm-mm.
need to meet together.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
We need each other.
Mhm. In all of the opportunities that our church or other churches might provide, they all have an intrinsic value to them, being together. Almost anything is better if we're together, because most of the time we spend our time with people who don't believe or don't believe much or anything, and that can make us think that that's the way life is, and then we get back together and we go, oh, I'm so glad I'm with a believer, because I could tell the difference, Now we're not perfect and we get on each other's nerves just as much as anybody else, but we have forgiveness, we have grace, we have what is not available in other locations that we might find. So the idea that we would be, remiss, I think that the thing I find with a lot of folks is they they feel like they've kind of got all that they're gonna get out of it. And they really don't have to do much more. And I'm like, but that's not the point. It's
But-
not, there's much more to get out of it. There's much more.
Oh, yeah.
You're settling for far too little to have, baptized your baby and then we'll see you in 20 years or never again. I mean, or anything I could use. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm troubled. I thought there was 5 warnings and we've only got 4 of them posted here.
I'd have to look and see, I guess, there might be a matter of what where they start counting.
Or why they decided to leave something off or something.
Yeah.
Or did they make that the first 2, 3, 4, 5? I don't.
I'll definitely look into that. Mhm.
Excuse me for the question.
Oh, good. Questions are welcome.
We always,
Every Sunday when I go home, I invariably tell my husband something about the sermon. So I'm spreading the wealth.
Yeah.
And what does he say back? Oh, don't bother.
you know what he says?
Depends on what it
Sorry.
was.
Okay.
Jesus was a Jew.
That's right.
Or there was Moses.
What do you hope to learn in the next weeks then, as we plow into this?
Reinforcement.
Reinforcement,
faith.
the same as what the goal of the book.
Yes.
Good, very good. Good.
one.
You're in the right
You can
place.
start.
Oh, thank you.
Any other curiosities or things you want me to look into? So
I'm
make
glad
sure
you
we-
did this because I'll be gone a couple of weeks, but I'll be in
Mhm.
Michigan,
Mhm.
but I will be there. At least I'll have this to go by.
Yeah, yeah. I
Maybe
thought-
I'll copy it and send it to you, email.
Yeah. Get excited there, girl.
All right.
You
Well,
were talking about groups earlier, how they're different. And when I moved to Florida, I found out that the people from Puerto Rico or, all the islands, they argue who speaks the best Spanish.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I go, what about Spain?
Portugal.
No, it's different.
Yeah. And then my mother got kicked out of the house for dating a non-Catholic.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
back in the early 40s, women didn't get their own apartment. So she married my dad after knowing him 3 weeks.
Oh, my word.
wow.
And 6 kids later, and 5 years later, they got divorced.
Wow.
She always says she wore gray to her wedding because that's what her marriage was like.
She wore a
You told
gray,
me that.
she wore a gray suit, and to this day, I will not wear gray.
There are other books available on Hebrews, obviously. This book I got called on Hebrews is the Interpretation Bible Commentary. I think I got it for a total of $6. I bought it used off Amazon. So $6 shipped.
Wow.
I'm a $3 book and $3 shipping or whatever, maybe a little bit more than that. The interpretation, Hebrews by Thomas Long. What I would say that I'm appreciating about this is it's almost on a devotional level of the reading. He really is brings out the power of each of the sections. It's especially designed for someone who's going to preach on it. But
bigger than the whole book of Hebrews.
yeah. Oh, man, some of these commentaries, it's amazing how far they can get, but it has some good articles too. I might end up copying some from you, but a good articles on various topics as well, but this almost goes verse by verse. So if you're looking for something like that, and then Bible Project, don't forget that.
You highlight it or was it purchased highlighted?
Yeah, it was, I paid extra for the highlighting.
That's the only downfall of buying books. Sometimes it's good, but used books are sometimes
Yeah.
highlighted.
I just bought a used book and it had the questionnaires and it was filled in.
I started buying books on a site when I was probably first in ministry. It was so exciting. It was half.com. And half.com was a used book site. And for the next couple of years, I was just able to buy a lot of books that I wanted very inexpensively. And then this company came along and bought it.
Amazon.
Amazon.
That's their first
Who's
business.
this Amazon? Who's Amazon? So they bought half.com, but what they bought, I guess, was the network of ways. But so if you look on Amazon, when you're going to buy a book, you can find that book on new or used. And if you're willing to wait a couple more days, you can save a lot, and they'll be shipping. And, there's usually a couple of the top ones that are, 30% of the cost of the new. Maybe less than that.
Books are usually $4 or $5.
Yes, I use
And if
that
you
too.
get $20, it ships free. And for every 20 books you buy, you get a free one.
Which one is this now?
Thrift book.
Thrift books. Okay, all right, that's good to know. Yeah. All right, guys.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
Bye, baby. Thanks for joining us. Bye,
Now, I think
You're muted, baby.
the end recording up at the top, we stop way up at the top. There's a square box left.
Left. Oh, there.
Keep going to your right. See the square box.
The square box.
Nope.
Right.
Square.
That's left.
Other side, the square box.
There, stop recording.
You want to?
Yeah.
Yes.